Good evening and welcome to another episode of The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Perry.
I'm your host, David. Tonight we're talking about Season 4, Episode 17, Accession. But before we continue, you can find us on Facebook, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube as The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast.
Absolutely. And as I say every single week, and we'll probably say every single week, you should find us and follow us because we are awesome. We're a pretty good time. And I feel like our breakdowns of this show are pretty spot on. I mean, it's not like some other shows that I've seen where they make wild whatever statements about the shows. There are some that are out there. I don't know why some people enjoy that or not, but some things are just whatever. I will say really quick, I do apologize for the delay in getting out last week's episode. That was the extra long episode that we did. There were some hiccups when it came to editing that episode, so it came out a little bit later than normal. But I feel like you were well compensated for it because you got an extra helping of us in that episode. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you can forgive, and hopefully we won't have any more of these hiccups in the future. But yeah, just wanted you to know that's all that was there, nothing major. But yes, we are here to talk about this 94th episode for us. 94th for us.
Oh, for us.
Okay. I believe it's the 94th for us. We're coming up on the big triple digits. But before we dive into the episode, of course, as always, I like to give us a chance to check in with each other. So, David, how has your week been?
Yeah, it's been good. Work was fine, is what it is. But what was most interesting this week was I got to see, two films since we last talked, which was Mission Impossible, the new one, and saw the new Oppenheimer by Christopher Nolan.
Yes. Okay, no spoilers for anybody, but just how we're both doing. Let's start with Mission Impossible. What did you think?
Both were great. Okay. I'll start with Mission Impossible because that's the one I was, leading up to the most. Oppenheimer was more recent. Mission Impossible 7 was great. The only problem with it is that because it's a two-parter, it indulges itself in being a little bit like they could have slimmed down the storytelling a little bit in order to. If it had been a single movie, its own standalone movie, they would have had reason to slim it up. But this one, because it knows it's going to take its time, it's going to have a second part. It's a little bit indulgent in its storytelling and how long it takes. There's one scene near the beginning. There's a lot of exposition going on, and like the camera is off over here. Like, hey, pay attention to this. Like, really, like, and the camera just like keeps pointing at it. Like, it's like, okay, we get it. We're paying attention to the thing you're pointing at. Like, we get it. It's just anyway. Great. It was a fun movie. A lot of typical Mission Impossible. If you've been watching them, we'll have to get an update from you, Perry, to see if you've got a chance to catch up yet. But
I've now committed myself in the next week to knocking them all out and getting that done. So we'll be able to talk about it.
Have you got through 3 yet? Last week I heard you got 2.
But I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna do that one tonight.
Good.
Just suffice to say, there were things that were happening. So I will do that one tonight. I'll do 3 tonight. I'll probably do 4 tomorrow, and then I will get the rest of them within the next few days after that. And then either this is in next Saturday, I may be able to get out and go and see the movie, the 7th one. So that's my plan.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. The more recent Mission Impossible movies have really started to focus on what Tom Cruise is willing to do for his stunts, and so this one is there's a big stunt. For those who haven't seen the trailers, I won't say anything. Just there's a big old stunt he does in this one, which was funny because I knew what the stunt was because they'd been advertising it like crazy, and so it wasn't a reveal for me to see the stunt because like they reveal the entire stunt in all these promos that they were doing about the behind the scenes of Mission Impossible 7. So I like that they were advertising the movie, but it also meant that some of the, I'd already seen some of the movie because they already promoted some of the big action sequences. So that was, if you show
that's
too much,
always the problem with with trailers and stuff. Yeah. They're trying to entice you, but then the draw becomes boring.
Right.
The second time around.
Exactly.
Okay.
But the plot was overall good, unique. Again, I won't say anything else, just that I enjoyed it. Other movie was Oppenheimer. I saw that Thursday night. Movies come out on a Friday, but they have showings Thursday nights, and it's meant to be seen in IMAX. But I didn't realize. I mean, I tried to keep my knowledge of the movie minimal beforehand. Like I was intentionally avoiding stuff. Like I didn't know that it's rated R. Reason that's important is only because Christopher Nolan doesn't usually do R. It's not a big problem. It's not like he goes crazy or anything. It's just that this is a heavier story than he's typically known for. And the movie is a full 3 hours long.
Oh, man. Okay. So it's a commitment. It's a commitment.
Yeah, my showing started at 9:10, so it takes like 20 minutes for them to get through all the ads and the trailers. So let's say 9:30. I didn't get out of there till 12:30 at night, and I didn't even realize it was going to take that long. Like I was getting out of the theater, being like 12:30. I was like, okay, but it was really good. I hate saying that I enjoyed it because I don't want to give people such a high expectation and then them go see it.
No. If you enjoyed it, you enjoyed it. I mean, everybody's take is going to be different.
Well, I enjoyed it so much that I really, really hope that it becomes an Oscar contender and that Christopher Nolan and he wins or someone wins for something. Because that 3 hours was something. I was not expecting the movie to be this way. It's about Oppenheimer, who helped develop the atomic bomb, who was in charge of the Manhattan Project. But I didn't know much about him at all. I didn't know about his life. And there was more to his story as the movie progressed than I realized there was going to be. That last hour is really important. That there's the first 2 hours, which are what I was kind of expecting. And then everything that happened in the last hour, I had no idea that was even something to be interested in.
Okay.
And so it was really well written. Christopher Nolan read the book American Prometheus, which is about Oppenheimer, and that used that to write the screenplay and then direct it. Because he's a screenwriter director. He's the type who writes his own movies, which means that he's really involved the whole way through. And you can really feel it. Really loved it. The other Christopher Nolan movies that I watched this week were like The Dark Knight Rises, which unfortunately, having rewatched it several times, it's definitely a drop down in quality from The Dark Knight. It feels sloppy. Unfortunately, it feels like they were trying to just kind of be done with Batman almost. Like we've done 2 movies, but Christopher Nolan wants to move on, and Warner Brothers basically said, okay, just do one more and then you can move on. It just doesn't feel as coherent as the previous 2. Interstellar, I think, is good, but I think that the ending has a problem, which I can detail later. But otherwise, rewatching Dunkirk was good because the first time I went to go see Dunkirk at the theater, I bought tickets a few days ahead of time. And when I went to the theater with my family, I was sitting down in the seats. And right before the movie started, someone came up and said, hey, those are our seats. This is a packed theater. And it turns out the guy I had bought the tickets from had sold me the tickets for the day I went there, not for the day that I had asked for. And so we had to go up to the front, get new tickets, and go back into the theater into worse seats. And the first 5-ish minutes had already started. So I was pretty pissed, as you can imagine. It also meant, though, that my enjoyment of the film was lessened because the first 5 minutes set up how he's telling the story. Dunkirk is told in a weird time frame where you're seeing things through different people's perspectives, but their version of events is also happening over different sets of time, which I will go into in more detail. I'm going to say that if you don't understand what's happening because you missed the first 5 minutes, it messes with your enjoyment of the film. And so rewatching Dunkirk, because it's been a while since I'd seen it, made me enjoy a little bit more than when I first saw it. And of course, I love Tenet. Tenet is great. If you pay attention to what's going on and you really look into go on YouTube and watch people explain what's happening, there's a lot. It was perfectly done. There are one or two things that I can nitpick, but otherwise love Tenet. And then Oppenheimer, which is kind of a new thing. This is not a sci-fi, action-y flick. There's not action in Oppenheimer. It's almost like a biopic. But yeah, really well done. Very, very Christopher Nolan, if you know his style. Really enjoyed it. Look forward to seeing it again. But if you're going to go see it, be ready for 3 hours.
Okay.
It's a full 3 hours. So anyway, how about you? How's your week been?
My week's been pretty steady. I finally got to notice that the opening for the position that I've been angling for has finally occurred, and so now with that, of course, they're not just going to select anybody. Unfortunately, they are making us kind of all go through their own internal interview process, but since I've got some additional trainings and things, I feel pretty confident about it. Now, I just know that I've been selected. There's only like 2 spots open. There's a bunch of people who are in the running apparently, but I feel like besides me and like maybe there's a smattering of people from all over who have all this exact same qualifications. So I'm glad that I was selected at least for the interview process. I'm hoping that I get the job, obviously. I do my first round of interviewing this coming Friday. So that's the work thing. Personally, I've been working out more and I seem to have roped my whole family into it now. I went from just being my nephew to now my sister and brother-in-law, they're coming along. I've got my mother and my aunt are going to be on their own program too that I'm helping them to formulate as well. And I'm really enjoying doing that for people, like getting people who like either have no experience whatsoever, or the people who obviously like who are more like me, who have a lot of experience, who've done this for years, and maybe you just fell out of practice for whatever particular reason.
Right.
So I've been having a lot of fun reestablishing things like that for people, and I'm looking forward to that continuing. I obviously have not been following up with the Mission Impossible movies. As I said that I would. I do apologize for that. I will get back on that. I have been reading more of The Expanse, and I have to admit I'm in parts of the book, and they're making references to things that came before that were in the previous book, and I don't remember them, and so it's been making me feel like I've skipped a book. So I'm going back and I've got like the 3rd book and I keep it with me. And just when they start to make certain references, I try to go back and find the sections to see it. Just maybe I skipped over it. I don't know. So just be aware of that. And maybe I just wasn't paying attention when I read that section or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
but,
the character Havelock it's Havelock, right? He was the partner in the first book in the
first book, right?
But in the show, the character I think he's killed off in the first season.
He's not killed off. He's almost killed, but he survives because they impale him. Right. But he survives, and then he ships out, and we never see him again. Right. Little did we know in the books, though, he pops back up. So
as a point of view character, yeah.
Yes. So I mean, there's a lot of that, and then there's some stuff about the proto-molecule and whatever else, and then there's some other things with some of the other characters too that just was like. I know I read it, but I just can't remember where. So I'm kind of keeping the books around me as like a quick reference just in case. But I'm enjoying it, which also has led me back to watching the show again because why not? And I'm just kind of like picking certain things, and I'm realizing like there are certain characters who are my favorite, but now reading the books, they're not. No, don't worry. Avasarala is not one of them. She's still my favorite. I still love that character. But like, for example, my opinion of Naomi has changed a little bit.
She's definitely different in the books versus the show.
Yeah, she certainly is. And whereas in the book, obviously, we get a little bit more depth with her. There are certain things about why she does what she does that I just don't agree with. And then when you read it in the book and then go back and watch the show and like watch how they do it in the show, I find that I dislike it even more. Like, for example, I was watching season 1 and, her whole giving Fred Johnson the molecule and her reason behind it. I really didn't agree with any of that whatsoever. And it just
in the show, you didn't like the show version.
Yes, in the show. I did not like the show's version. And that's kind of standing out to me, But it's just little things like that that really just been keeping me entertained. Also, the new Star Trek show, Strange New Worlds. It's the only Trek show that's out right now. Everything else is either has finished their run, otherwise canceled, or in production. Right. Been enjoying that. The new season is great. It's got a lot of great callbacks to both the original series and kind of doing their own thing. So I've really been enjoying that. And that's the thing I wanted to say for people who are watching the show or maybe are curious about the show. One, due to its episodic nature, you don't necessarily have to watch what came before to watch an episode. And I say all that because the next episode coming up is a groundbreaking episode. If you are interested at all, you should watch it, especially if you're a fan of crossovers, where one crew goes to another cruise ship or station or whatever it is. This is the first time ever in the history of the franchise that we will have animated characters jumping from animation to live action next week. It's the first time. I'm really excited. So there are some characters from Lower Decks who will be making an appearance on the Enterprise
as their live action version,
as their live actions self, right?
Not the animation is suddenly being imposed on live action. Yeah. Okay,
and the beauty of that is the voice actors for the Lower Decks characters will be playing their live action roles.
Good.
So that that's awesome. That's absolutely awesome. I'm really excited to see what they do with it, how they do it. But yeah, if you're interested at all, tune in next week. That'll be on the 28th. No, sorry, the 27th, because it's going to be on Thursday. On the 27th is when that episode comes out. You should watch it. You'll probably enjoy it. I know I'm looking forward to it. And I would love to be able to talk about it with some other people too. So yeah, watch it.
Okay.
But we're not here to talk about Lower Decks and Strange New Worlds or any of those other shows. We are here to talk about Deep Space Nine, the always underrated, but as we are discovering, masterfully done television show from the 90s. And we are talking about this episode here in the fourth season, Accession or Accession. I've heard it pronounced. I don't know which one.
I was trying to think how to pronounce
very
it
weird. Yeah. I've said Accession. I've said Accession for years. I've heard it pronounced Accession. I understand that because of access being right there in the beginning, but I do believe it is Accession. So there you go.
Gotcha. And again, for everyone who didn't remember from last week, we have officially completed the first half of the entire show. This is now.
We are now on the downward slope.
Yes.
We are now going into the end here.
Right.
There's so much to come, though. Don't worry.
I know.
There's so much to come. The next few episodes, in fact,
part of the reason I bring it up is because this episode refers back to the original pilot episode.
Yes, it does.
So it's kind of like a little soft reboot.
Right. And because it features Captain Sisko, and it's on that path of, it's further explaining his role as the emissary, which we really haven't touched on in quite some time. So it's nice to kind of that here we are in this, we're hitting the back half basically, and we're kind of catching back up with where we are with that. So would you like me to give the recap, or do you want to do it?
I did last week's, so I think it's your turn.
Okay. All right. Well, as succinctly as possible, I will just say that this episode starts with Sisko being called upon to perform his emissary duties. There's a couple that recently got married, and they want the emissary to bless them. He's a little uncomfortable about doing it, but he does it anyway. And he kind of, again, talks to Dax about the fact that, him being seen as a religious icon is bothersome, not just professionally, but also personally. They are then interrupted by something coming through the wormhole. It's an old light ship, very similar to the one that Sisko built in the episode Explorers that him and Jake went on with their little fancy trip, It's all beat up, broken. It's really old. They say it's like 300 years old, but there's somebody in it. They beam the survivor aboard. It's an old Bajoran guy named Akram, I believe was his name. Akram Lon. So he's a Bajoran who almost died. He got swallowed up by the wormhole, and now he's back. And believing that having spent so much time lost in the wormhole and with the prophets, he is the actual emissary, not Captain Sisko. They basically ask him a few questions. He establishes who he is. He's a renowned poet on Bajor who went missing and was presumed dead again 300 years ago. And now here he is. Based upon the various prophecies, he does seem to fit the description, at least initially, of the emissary. And this delights Sisko. He's kind of relieved. Finally, someone else can take over this mantle for him, and he can go back to this being a Starfleet officer again, which is really all he wants.
Right.
So at first he's really happy about that, but then one of the very first things that Akram does is he starts advocating for the reestablishment of what are called Dajaras, which was the Bajoran caste system, which separated people out by their family and region where they lived. and based upon this information, you were only allowed to have certain jobs. Like Kira is a part of the artisan grouping, so she shouldn't be in the military at all. She should be a sculptor or a painter or something. And so that's her Dajar. That's what she's supposed to do. There's another guy who he is a Vedic, but because of his Dajar, he's supposed to basically do funeral rites only.
Yes.
He can't be a Vedic, so that comes up later. But basically, it's to say that it's a caste system. Now, the Federation, remember, the whole reason that they're in the system is to bring Bajor into the Federation. But the Federation is all about inclusion and equality. No one better than anyone else for something as what they would consider stupid or silly, like castes. We're not going to hold people back because of a caste system. So now here is Cisco faced with the fact that this is being reestablished on Bajor, and the Federation's like, well, they can't be a member if they have a caste system. So now Cisco's facing heat from the Federation because Bajor is looking like they're going backwards. His whole mission was to bring Bajor into the fold. He's now being basically looked at as he's failing his mission, which Kira tries to come to his defense. She's like, it's not really your fault. This is something else entirely. Which this is kind of beginning to let us see that there is a clear misunderstanding of how religion is viewed and held within the Federation, and in particular Starfleet. We can see that there's a disconnect here, and they're trying to figure out a way to rectify the situation, but it's not going well. Meanwhile, we have another Vedic on the station, a Vedic Porta, who is all about bringing back the Dajars. If that's what the emissary said, then that's what you should do. And he's a hardcore advocate. He's telling Kira that's why she's struggling, because she hasn't given herself completely over to what the emissary is asking. And he's just a very strong proponent of doing this. It reaches a fever pitch when, again, the same Vedic kills the other Vedic who wouldn't step down and do just funeral rites only. He pushes him off of the upper level of the promenade, snaps the guy's neck, and he dies. And he says he did it because he refused to give up his Vedic ways and follow his Dajara. This brings in the new emissary, Akram, and Cisco wants to sit down and talk with him. And Akram's like, well, hey, transitions, what are you going to do, man? They're hard. And Cisco's like, wait a minute, what? Like, the guy just murdered someone, and that's all you got to say? And he's like, well, I expected there to be some kind of resistance, but we got to just roll with it. We got to get everybody back to the Dajaras. This basically pitches Cisco off, and he's like, no, this can't happen. I'm not going to let you do this. I'm willing to be the emissary again to put a stop to this. And the guy's like, well, yeah, you try it, and you're going to run into some issues. And Cisco's like, well, there's one way we can figure this out. We'll just go ask the prophets. So they do. They get in the runabout. They go back to the wormhole. They ask the prophets, who are just as weird and non-linear as you can expect. They don't understand what later, before, after, time in general just seems to be, beyond them, to say the least. But they finally start to grasp what Cisco is saying about the issue in Akram being around. And they realize that, we can just send him back to where he was before we found him. And they're ready to just kind of send him back and let him die. But Cisco advocates, no, let him, stay healthy, but just send him back and let him live out the rest of his days in the past. So they agree, and they send him back. Cisco is now once again the emissary, and essentially all is right with the world on that story. Now, we do have a slight B plot that's going on. This involves Bashir and O'Brien, who are basically seeing the end of their bromance, because not Kira, but Keiko, who's been working on Bajor, as we know, as we've seen from earlier episodes, she is back. And not only is she back, but it looks like she's going to be around for a while because she's pregnant. Yay. And so now the O'Brien family is expanding and feeling himself very much in the family way. O'Brien wants to spend more time with his family. But of course, this means the end of him and Bashir fighting whatever in the holodeck, or, tinkering around in the quarters and whatever else.
No more
but of
darts
course,
forever.
Yeah, no more darts, no more just drinking beers and whatever else. Well, going back into the family routine is a lot harder for O'Brien than he realized, and he's just not happy. He's not enjoying it. No one really seems to want him around. Keiko is still working. She's just now working in their quarters. Molly, she's, a precocious kid, and she's got her own things going on too. She doesn't really seem to want to be bothered. So he's just kind of like there. He could be out doing things, but he feels obligated to stay home.
Right.
Her name is stuck in my head. Keiko decides basically to use some old wife trickery, I guess, and basically play the two friends off of each other to make it seem like the other one is missing the other one. She tells O'Brien, hey, I ran into Bashir. He seemed really depressed. He's probably missing you. Why don't you go hang out with your buddy? And he's like, sure, anything to cheer up the doc. And while he walks out, she calls Bashir and basically lays him the same guilt trip, but using O'Brien, of course. Right. The two friends reunite, and they're now having, their good time.
Right.
And they're kind of back to what they were doing.
Right.
So that's essentially the episode. We are going to talk about certain things, obviously, but those are the highlights. And as always, if you want to get the full deep dive and appreciate everything we're going to say now, you should go watch the episode. You can totally pause this and go watch it. Show's 30 years old. You should have watched it anyway. But hey, here we are.
Right.
So, all that said and done, as always, first question. David, Mr. I've never seen the episode before. What did you think of the episode?
So like I said, this episode definitely references the first episode of the season, or of the series, that is, with going to the wormhole and directly meeting the prophets. This is the first time that Sisko, I can remember, going to the wormhole and talking with the prophets in the wormhole since the pilot. We've had him interact with, like Kira, she interacted with an orb on Bajor, and Kaiopaka was her own thing at times during the first season. And she returns, by the way. That was one detail.
We're going to talk about that. That was one of the things I was going to say. Is we hit the highlights, but yes, Camille Saviola is back once again as Kaiopaka.
Exactly. It's the idea of beings who are not linear in time and trying to understand that is an interesting concept. It's interesting because it also, they still have to in some ways do that because they do have a conversation that has a linear progression when they're up there. But whatever, it's unique.
So just to that real quick, I will say, remember, as they even say in this episode, Sisko taught them about linear time. So they do grasp the initial concepts of it. I just think there are still certain aspects of it that they haven't totally wrapped their mind about. But that was the first episode. That was Emissary, him teaching them about linear existence and what it is and what it means.
Right. However, the idea that this guy who thought he was the emissary, we could just send him back in time and it solves our problem in the present. And not only does he go back in time, but he lives and he fixes the poem. I mean, they address it because Kira's like, wait a minute, I remember the poem not being complete, and yet it's now complete. Like, how does that make sense? And I don't know exactly what Sisko says.
Sisko says the prophets. He says the prophets work in mysterious ways. That's what
exactly what I mean. It's like, who knows? I'm like, I'm a stickler.
It could potentially be an allusion to, something that happens in the future. We don't know. It could also be kind of more of an allusion to what the prophets say when Akram asked them. He's like, well, if I'm not your emissary, why did you bring me here? Why did you let me come here? And they said, for the Sisko. Right. And so what I took anyway from that revelation was that they knew about Sisko's kind of crisis of faith, basically. That he was hesitant about totally assuming the title of emissary, and this was their way of kind of pushing him to recognize that it is his role.
Okay.
And even Opaka says at the end, "You are of Bajor." She's alluding to the fact that this is his role. This is where he's supposed to be, and kind of, accept your mantle, man. Stop fighting it so much.
Right. Yeah, I guess that's fair. That is important that they're trying to jumpstart Sisko's adherence to this position he's got. He's always treated it with a hand outstretched.
He's very distant. He doesn't take it. He doesn't take it seriously, but he tries his best to really, box it in. He only does these very specific things. He doesn't. He doesn't embrace it the way he embraces his role of being a Starfleet officer, and that's like the point. They want him to do both.
And we've always, at least my understanding has always been like the reason he is embracing it is because one, it's not his faith. Again, the very idea of the wormhole is also the temple. The Bajorans have a religious aspect to the wormhole, but he's from the Federation. That's not how he thinks of it. It's just a wormhole. So he doesn't have the same belief system as the Bajorans. And so this episode really kind of pushes that on him a bit, being like, well, I mean, we are beings up here that have some sort of effect on Bajor, and you are a part of that.
Yes.
Take that as you will, but that is certainly true. And then finally, the other part of it is we know that Sisko is a humble guy. He's not the type to go run around and tell people. Like Kira says to Sisko when he has given up the role of the emissary, and he's starting to regret it, and she says to him, we would have done anything, we would have tried as hard as we could to do anything you asked of us. And Sisko is kind of like, that's important. It's like,
mixed feelings to say the least. Right.
Yeah. He's not the type to abuse his power. Even though he might want to, kind of effectively command the Bajorans to do this, do that, Bajorans, get your political affairs in order, quit running around with your army. And to be frank, I think Kira is a little bit overselling it. Yes, she herself, and yes, the very religious, obedient Bajorans would have tried obeying the emissary. But as long as one or two people, object or try and rebel, there would still be issues. I mean,
and we see that here. We saw the Vedic who was like, no, I'm not going to stop being a Vedic because some old dude said I can't be a Vedic anymore. I mean, it got him killed, but I mean, it's essentially the conversation. The, Vedic Porta went to him and said, hey, your Dajara says you can't be a Vedic anymore. And the guy was like, screw you, old man. And then he got pushed over the bridge.
The old man was like so proud of his killing that dude. Like, I killed that dude in public and I had no
yeah, of course I did it. He wasn't following his Dajara. So boom, dead. I mean, Now it's also, I feel like it's very important to note that, with the Federation and with Starfleet in particular, obviously we have a lot of different races with a lot of different cultural backgrounds and religious beliefs and everything else. And this is something that, we've heard talked about several times, even in the Next Generation. Picard has made several speeches about the fact that, there are so many different races and religions and cultures, and everybody who chooses to join the Federation, chooses to, especially if you choose to be a Starfleet officer, you have agreed to put that aside because we want everyone to be equal. If your religion says that somebody else is unclean, terrible, not worthy, whatever it is, if you still believe that, you can't be in Starfleet because we believe everyone is equal. And it's also very important to note that is a choice. If you do not want to give up your beliefs, you do not have to be in the Federation. We see this with the Klingons. Klingons have a very different cultural background, and while they don't, so obviously they don't believe everything that the Federation does, and the Federation's like, that's fine. You don't have to be a part of the Federation. We can still be friends. We can still be allies, but you don't have to totally buy into everything that we're doing here. That's kind of going back to that chief lesson that we've talked about before too. The Federation is basically like, we will do whatever it takes to make sure everybody gets along, except push beliefs on people, except make you do whatever compulsory, whatever it is. That's what makes them different from like the main antagonists that we see, like the Romulans or the Borg, for example. That's what we're seeing here too with Sisko is, like you said, Kira indicates that as emissary, Sisko could have ordered them to do whatever he wanted, but he knows that he needs to not make it an order, but show them that, being more cooperative and being more inclusive is in your best interest. If ultimately they decide they don't want to do it, that's on them. but all he can do is give them the tools and the examples to move forward. And I think that's another reason why he was also so uncomfortable with Akram, because Akram comes in and day one's like, nah, return to your Dajaras. Do it right now. Come on.
Yeah, his first speech on the promenade was like, we're going to go back to the way things were before the Cardassian occupation. And
right.
This is
and like way before. Not even like, oh, it was 50 years ago. Let's try to make our life like it was 50 years ago. It was no. 300 years ago. Go all the way back.
Yeah. And so have Dajaras been mentioned before, or is this the first time that's come up?
This is the first time that we've heard a mention of Dajaras specifically, but Kira has told the story of how, once the occupation really set in and the desire for, the resistance and everything else started to spring up, how everybody stopped doing whatever it was they were doing beforehand, and it became this collective resistance of the occupation. So that's the only other time we've ever heard of a mention of life before, but there was never a specific, oh yeah, we were all specifically this. No.
Okay.
This is the first time we've heard it like that.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, because I was like, I don't remember hearing anything about this before. Yeah, it's the thing that I thought of as I was thinking about caste systems, of course, is India, and then Britain. Britain is like the Cardassians, that they, conquered India and ruled India for a time, and that had something to do with, I think the caste system existed before the Britons came, and I don't know how that affected the Indians, because it seems like it's not gone. I imagine it's not the same as what it was.
Yeah, I'm not 100% on that either, but I've fragmented memory. I believe the same thing, that like once England took over, they essentially eliminated the caste system for a while. But then once England pulled out of India and, the people started to reestablish their own lifestyles and so forth, I think the caste system kind of had a resurgence.
Right.
So, and so now it's like, it's kind of weird. Like, you can see people who are still kind of following along with it a little bit, but I don't think it's as severe with younger and younger generations as it would have been with the older ones.
Right. Yeah, it's I mean, I don't think anyone would deny that caste systems are oppressive. It's interesting that
by their very nature, they're oppressive. I mean, you are restricting people from living any kind of life just based upon, as we see here in this episode, by a name or a region where you were born. So because you were born there, you can now no longer be anything else, because that's what everybody in that region does.
Yes, which is very, because as we saw, Kira tries doing some artwork, and she only tried once. I mean, there is an argument that they could have made to her of like, you just started trying, which is basically, I guess, the argument, like, go off and learn from some other artists. But yeah, the thing that really struck me, though, was that in comparison to like the Indian caste system, is like, my understanding of the Indian caste system is like it's 5 tiers or something like that. So it's not as specific as this one is. Like, you are an artist, you do funeral rites, you do this. You don't have like a range of things in that society. It's not like you're a day laborer, whatever that means, or you're a ruling caste, whatever that means. It's very specific. I mean,
well, let's keep in mind, obviously, that this is obviously Trek trying to do an allegory here, and there's a very limited window that they can present things, and but we did get a couple of different layers. So, like, first, we know that there are groups that are specifically going to be military personnel. If you're not born in that region, in that family or whatever, it actually seems to be 2 different things. So if you're born in a particular region, that decides your job. In this region, you're artisans. This region, you're, cooks or whatever. In this one, you're the military. Then the second part of the Dajara seems to be related to your name and your family name. We see a woman give up a seat to Kira because she has a different family crest than Kira's, and Kira is of a higher rank. This also seems to be indicated by the ornate rings that the earrings that the Bajorans wear. The woman motions to her ring. She says, "You're Evola, I'm something else," and she motions to her earring. And so now we know that the earrings are not just a religious significance iconography, but it also has to do with the Dajara and the ranking and where you lived and what you did. Right. So it was a way of telling people just by looking at your ear who you were, what family you were a part of, and what your job was.
Right.
So, and Cisco's like, yeah, it's been happening all day. Anytime anybody comes in with a higher ranking Dajara, someone else gives up their seat. So so we know that then certain families, certain jobs are clearly valued more than others. And so there's a ranking to that too. So yeah, a lot of different quick levels of complexity they threw at us here, trying to just determine how these Dajaras work, while also seeing obviously the inherent issues with a caste system.
Right. Yeah, it's again, because I hadn't heard of the Dajaras before, it's kind of a sudden change to hear about Bajoran history. But part of the reason I was bringing up the whole Britain and India thing was like, the Cardassian. What are the Cardassian? Our main Cardassian. I can't think of his name. Gul Dukat. I couldn't think of his name. Anyway, yes, Gul Dukat is all like, yeah, we Cardassians helped you Bajorans out of your backward ways, and you should thank us. And, Kira being like, what the hell are you talking about? And then I see this episode, and I'm like, I think he might have a kind of a point.
So, yes. So, I mean, if you want to go that route, let's look at things from the viewpoint of the devil, basically.
Yeah, devil's advocate.
What we know of the Bajoran people before the occupation of Cardassia, they were at the height of kind of a cultural renaissance. They've been known for years. Like they have technology, but it seems to be very simplistic at best. They're more concerned with the spirit, with spirituality. They have a more artistic side. They're more into music and art and literature and those types of aspects of culture, not war, not aggression, not, developing technology along those lines.
Right.
When the Cardassians arrive, all they see is a bunch of basically, backwood farmers who've got a lush green planet, that's full of resources that we could easily exploit. These people don't have a standing military. They can't put up any kind of fight. We can take everything that we need to build up our own war machine, and we can make them do it by slave labor. So they come in, they establish a base, they just obliterate all this stuff. They don't care about your Dajaras and what region you're from. You're a worker. We need you to process all these raw minerals we're raping out of your planet at an alarming rate. We need you to, build our ships and everything else. We don't care what your Dajara is. So yes, they eliminated all of that. And then they unified the people, which also goes back to an early first season episode where Cisco has to mediate a dispute between two different groups of Bajorans. Remember, and that one was led by that young woman who Jake and Nog were fascinated by. So, they've eliminated all of that, and they've united all the Bajorans under one cause. Get rid of the Cardassians, end the occupation. So now it doesn't matter what your Dajara was. You can fight, can't you? You can resist. You can do all these other things. So that becomes their main thing. And so then for the next 50, 60 years, that's their whole goal. Get these people off the planet. They finally do leave. They finally do drive them off. And now it's, we have to save ourselves. We have to save our planet. Can our planet be saved? What damage has been done? So again, the thought of Dajaras is far from anybody's mind. And I would probably say, considering how long ago Akram lived, I don't think Dajaras were probably as important to the Bajorans of 50 years ago as it was to him from 300 years ago.
Yeah, you think it was already kind of working itself out?
Yeah, probably already kind of, because as we see that in our own culture, things that were, again, like take kings and queens, for example. They used to be the end-all be-all for everybody, right? And we've moved away from that over time. I would say probably over the course of 300 years, we probably would have seen the same kind of decline, and it being more of a, a cultural, more of a traditional thing, not something stringently enforced.
Right.
And then here he comes, and he's just like, no, hardcore, old school Djaris, 100%.
Right.
And I think that's the disconnect. So again, to play the devil's advocate here, Ducat is correct. They elevated them from this racist, xenophobic group to a united front, a united people with one cause, one goal.
Right.
And they didn't even erect a statue of the man. Like, he deserves his thanks, man.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
So now,
I was going to say that.
Go ahead.
I was going to say that Shakar, the first minister, he was a farmer. So part of what the new emissary is saying is like, we'll let him keep his job, but during the next election, I'm sure everyone will realize that he's not meant to be the leader of the first minister or whatever, and he can go back to being a farmer like he deserves to be. It's just
also honorable mention. He says, I've talked, the new emissary, Akram says, I've talked with the Kai and she agrees with me. And Cisco's like, I bet she does. I bet she does agree with you. That witch. Space Karen. She's not even in the episode. She's just angering up the blood, man.
And that moment where he reaches for Cisco's ear, because Cisco's like telling him, like, this ain't right. And he like reaches for Cisco's ear and he grabs him and he's like, I sense
I see why Opaka thought you were the emissary, and I see why Kai Wynn fears you.
Yeah. And I'm like, get this superstitious snake charming nonsense out of here. This what is it? The fake people who say, fortune tellers. Get that fortune telling nonsense out of here. Cisco can see that a mile away.
Miss Cleo was a life changer for a lot of people in the mid 90s. All right.
The whole Dajara thing is interesting. It's interesting to see Kira just kind of go for it. Again, we didn't talk about it yet, but Odo confronts her and he's like, why are you so like quick to move on from Cisco being the emissary to this new guy? And she says, when you have faith, you don't need to explain yourself. When you don't understand it. Which I kind of get that. I feel like it feels like it's part of the reason I have a problem with the Bajoran religion is it seems very superstitious a lot of the time. And so I feel like that's definitely a superstitious kind of comment. Like, you just get it or you don't. Like, okay.
Yes, Odo says, your faith, and he said, I don't mean to be difficult, but your faith has led you into a contradiction. And she's like, I don't see it as a contradiction.
Yeah.
And he says, I don't understand. And she's like, well, that's the thing about faith. If you don't have it, you can't understand it. But if you do, no explanation is necessary. So in that instant, they're less talking about the, A to B to C of Cisco being the emissary and then not, and more about faith in the overall belief in the prophets, and that the prophets are directing them along a path. And she has faith that the prophets are doing what they view as in the best interest of Bajor. They might not have told her specifically, but her faith informs her that she needs to trust the process, basically.
Right.
Whereas he is kind of pointing out there's kind of what he sees as he views as a flaw in her logic.
Right.
And she's like, you're focused. She's telling him you're focused on the wrong thing. And he's kind of saying the same thing to her. And basically it's a mutual misunderstanding of each other. Well, but she's like, I don't have to understand you, because this is my faith, and this is how I'm,
Well, it actually, as you talk about that, it makes me think, it's interesting. If we're saying that this episode and what happens here was to convince Cisco that he is meant to be the emissary, then it means that a lot of social unrest occurred over the course of this episode, which is insinuated of being several weeks when Bashir and Brian are talking. Like, it's been a while since we've hung out. And that Vedic guy died. The one Vedic murdered him. So, like, for Cisco to learn his lesson, some people had to die and some social unrest had to occur. I mean, the dying of the one guy, we don't know much else, but it's kind of an interesting thought. Like, Kira's like, I'm trusting the prophets. And meanwhile, it's like, hey, Cisco, get in gear, because things are happening while you're having this crisis of faith.
Right.
Yeah, it's I mean, I think I imagine people could make biblical comparisons to what I just said. But anyway, um, it's an interesting. The show is trying to really explore the idea of what it means to have this particular religious faith as a Bajoran, and I'll give them props. They have really tried that, and it's I think it's been
They're
rocky at
trying to
times,
treat it.
but
I feel like they are trying their best to treat this, and just with religion in general. Let's not just
yeah,
say the Bajoran religion, but I feel like they're trying to treat tenets of religion in general with respect and
right,
trying to show how you can have both. You can be a believer and not and exist in the same space, or you
right.
can have those two people.
Well, I guess
This
the
is
reason
something that Star Trek has really struggled with
right.
over its long run.
Well, the reason I say trying to work on the Bajoran religion is to emphasize that I do think there are differences between what the Bajoran religion is and like what I believe as a Christian. Like when I
Yeah,
say faith, I don't mean it in that blind faith kind of way that Kira sort of insinuates here. A lot of people might think that that's what it means, or even as Christians might even say that. I think the more mature understanding of what faith is supposed to mean in Christian context is like trust in what you have known to be true in the past moving forward into the future. Like I have faith that the pilot of this plane who has been successful in the past will successfully land this plane next time. Or I have faith that the sun will come up in the morning because it has in the past. And we know that those things are true. There's evidence for it. We can say that that'll occur again. And then in the biblical context, saying if God has revealed himself to be this certain way, he's a loving God, and he will treat people in a loving way. Again, that's a very generic statement. That's what I'm getting at when I say
okay.
the Bajoran way of religion and the show is working that out. Even
Yes.
if there are differences with how I view things in my own life, it's not that the show isn't trying to work out its own thought process and make comparisons to other faith religions. Don't get me wrong. I'm not
Yeah.
saying that they're isolated in their attempts. I'm just saying that I'm mainly focused on how they're doing it on the show for the show's sake, at least at the moment. So,
Right.
but yeah, it's
Well,
it's fun to see Cisco kind of embrace his role because it's what is that going to mean now? Sorry,
right.
I interrupted you. You're about to
So
say something,
no,
but yeah,
I was only going to say, again, this is something that Star Trek has struggled with whenever it comes to any religion, whether they are trying to feature a known Earth-based religion of any kind or dealing with establishing an alien religion of any kind. It's always very hard for them to nail things down, and I understand they do it that way on purpose because there's a greater message that they're trying to reach
right,
with the overall episode, and there are time constraints, and there's also uh, the CEOs of Paramount and wherever else who are like, yeah, no, you can't do that. Like even this episode, they did not want them to do a religious episode.
right,
They felt like the religious episodes were just kind of like, ratings quagmires, basically. It was too much. They felt like it was
right,
too much for people to really, sit with and think about and so forth. And they just didn't want it to happen a whole lot. And they understood the overall significance of Bajor and the prophets to this show, but they wanted the more superstitious part of it to be represented as little as possible.
right,
But doing a show like this and the way that, especially the way that like characters like Kira, for example, are directly informed by their belief would have been very difficult.
right.
So I feel like this would be an interesting thing to see today, considering how things have changed with the way that we can present things on TV and in movies and so forth, and to see how they would have maybe leaned more into the religious aspect, and especially kind of like that borderline fanaticism of Vedic Porta that leads him to kill the other Vedic,
Right.
I would have been interested to see that. And, and also get more of Kaiopaka coming back and showing the stark differences between her and Kai Wynn, who they're just so
Black and
different.
white,
Even in this,
baby. Yeah.
yeah. And even in these brief flashes of Opaka, I have to admit, like, I was just like, man, I really miss her. Like, just in those just brief moments, it is like I like her so much more as Kai than Win.
Yeah, she's got a charisma about her in this brief.
She definitely does. She's
How
very
can I? Who are you?
dynamic, very for
Yeah. How can I know who you are if you don't know who you are?
Yeah. How can I know you if you don't know yourself?
Yeah, that sounds like something that I assume this show has said something like that before, but it's certainly
she has said that to him. She has said
Okay.
that to him before in the past, which was I think in their second meeting, she said something like that to him. No, it was the first meeting because she kept saying that he was going to be the emissary. And he was like, no, I don't know what that means. I'm not going to do that. And she's like, you're the emissary.
Right.
And I can't help you until you help yourself. That's what she tells him.
Yeah.
I can't help you until you help yourself.
Yeah. It's definitely something that I think we've seen before on Deep Space Nine. I'll have to review that scene as you described it. It's also something that I'm sure you could say you've heard other places. But yeah, I'm not saying that it takes away from this scene. I'm just saying that's how can I help you unless you help yourself? How can I know you until you know yourself?
It's a very interesting, I like it not just for the the religious significance, but I feel like that is something that should be you can apply just to yourself, religious or otherwise. Like, how can you ask of another person something or ask to know someone if you don't know yourself? If you're not aware of who you are as an individual, how can you go to someone else and kind of demand the same knowledge of them? So I really like how this all kind of plays out for Sisko and to help inform him of who he is.
Right. Yeah. I guess I would just say that there are definitely times where I think other people do sometimes know us better than ourselves, and that's a good thing. They can give us insight into our lives, but the point that Kai Opaka is certainly making is that she can't be the emissary for him, for example.
Right.
Yeah, it's his role to fulfill, however that comes about. Yeah.
And I also think it's kind of informing him of the fact that he is. It's less about this role of emissary, spiritual, so forth, but more leader of Bajor. You are a leader of these people. And there are many ways you can. Right, and there are many ways you can lead, and right now you're leading by example, and your example is terrible because you're pulling back from this role that has been given to you, from this responsibility that has been given to you.
I wouldn't say it's been terrible. I feel like it's. We know Sisko. Sisko isn't the type, because as we said, he's not going to abuse this emissary power he's been given.
I don't mean it like that. He might
embrace it more now. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I don't mean it like that. But like, for example, let's strip away the title and the prophet's aspect of it, right?
Right.
And let's look at his mission as the Starfleet officer who is trying to bring Bajor into the fold, right?
Right.
He doesn't necessarily have to abuse the power of emissary, but if he was to do more to be inclusive towards Bajoran people, which we find out from past episodes, he doesn't go to festivals. He barely does the blessings and stuff that they ask him to. Right. He basically he doesn't really participate in any of the ceremonies or whatever it is. Why? Why not show up? They're not necessarily asking him to say, oh, and the prophets commanded me to tell you to do this or whatever, but just be there. Just show up and show that you can be welcoming to and that you're interested in these people and their right.
Yeah.
Would have gone a long way towards his overall mission of bringing them into the Federation. Right. By him being so standoffish, he makes himself stand apart. He makes it so that they can't know him. And it's harder for them to work with him and trust him because everything he does, he keeps them at a distance.
Yeah.
Right.
By holding himself up to the position of emissary, he's also holding a hand up to the Bajorans in a sense as well.
Yes.
He's saying, keep a distance. We want to keep a distance there.
And we even see this in his relationship with Kira. Remember, even in the episode where he got knocked out and she was praying over him, and she talks about how, she's always felt like he's kept her at a distance. That's not what she wanted, but she's noticed that it made him more comfortable if she kept her distance from him, because that seemed to be the distinction that he wanted. Right. And then, we saw at the end of the episode, they changed a bit and they went and, they watched the baseball game together and everything. And now we see here, even in this episode, they seem much more comfortable with each other. They're working very well together. And then when she's telling him about how she's going to step down, she's going to resign, and she's got some replacements lined up for him to interview and so forth, they get emotional with each other for a second. The realization that they're not going to be working together. They're not going to have their relationship anymore because of this thing. And he's like, yeah, we can find someone else to do the job, but I'm, to replace you, that's like impossible, Right. It was a great scene between two of them, just to show the growth in their characters and how much closer they have come to each other. Right. Once Cisco stopped being so, standoffish with her. Right. And I feel like it's a great allegory for how he needs to view Bajor at large, and we kind of see him accepting that at the end when Apaka is telling him, "You are of Bajor." Right. Yeah. I can fill your post, but replace you. Yeah. Speaking of Apaka, we gotta mention real quickly that part of what Cisco tries doing is denying that he had a vision from Apaka by going to Bashir to get some drugs. Yeah. He says that, when Bajorans have visions, they have a higher whatever count of neural peptides. They've got neural peptides that are overproduction. But Bashir is like, but people who have that are people who have had interactions with orbs and are supposedly denying visions they've had. So what are you denying, Cisco? And he's like, what's wrong with you, Cisco? And he's like, I have too many pepto. Right, I've got too many neuropeptides. Peptides, yeah. Ain't nothing wrong with me. Right, nice little deny. Yeah. And what? Yeah. So onto our B plot real quick. Yes. I did want to bring up one other. I love this scene where it's shortly after O'Brien has found out that he is going to be, having another kid. And he is in the bar, and it's him, Bashir, and Quark, and they're making the general announcement and everything else. And then Worf comes in, and Bashir's like, "Oh, did you hear the news? Keiko's pregnant." And Worf's like, "What?" He says Keiko's gonna have another baby. He's like, "What? Now?" And they're like, "No, not now, man. In like 7 months. Calm down." He's like, "Oh, I will. I'll be away from the station. Far away from the station." And I go, "Yeah, Worf delivered Molly all those years ago." And I was like, "That's right, he did deliver Molly. Yeah. Forgot about that." Yeah. And so and now Worf is terrified. Yeah. Big I don't remember the Klingon details of that episode. I do. That, but so that is the Star Trek Next Generation episode called Disaster, and that is where the ship is struck by, I believe, a quantum filament, I think, and it knocks out power across the entire ship. And that's where O'Brien, Ensign Rowe, and Deanna are trapped on the bridge. Right. Picard is trapped in a turbo lift with some kids. Data and Riker end up crawling through Jeffrey's tubes to get to main engineering. And then there's like a bunch of people who are trapped in 10 forward, one of them being a very pregnant Keiko and security chief Worf. And Worf, using his handy-dandy tricorder, begins reading through the procedure of childbirth and trying to help her deliver this baby. Yes. Yeah. He's like, "You are now fully dilated. You can commence to push." She's just... She's staring at him like, just stare, right. Can and so then he delivers the baby. Help you deliver a baby. Oh my God. He's like, "I will now spank the child to induce breathing." And you hear the light taps, and then the baby starts crying, and he gives it to her. Yeah, it was an interesting scene and an interesting choice of birthing coach there in Worf. But great scene. And he handles it well. So for him to now flash forward and being like shell shocked, now I'm going to be far away. Like, he does. You did fine, man. Right? Yeah.
That's a funny scene, and that's the only scene with him in it. I think Worf didn't really appear
That's it.
anywhere
Yeah,
else.
he dips out. No, he meant it when he said far away. He
Yeah.
got in the shuttle and he left. Now we're not going to see Worf for
he
7
got back
months.
to the Defiant right away, and the Defiant shortly thereafter some exploratory missions to
right. Several missions. He's got the Defiant on lockdown. No one with O'Brien DNA is going to be able to get on the Defiant. He's going to make sure.
I have to say though, O'Brien, I want to smack this fool up across his head. His wife comes home from being gone for basically a year, and one of the first things he's told by his 4-year-old daughter is that mommy's pregnant, and his reaction is the worst. He's like, "Aw, really? That means I'm gonna have to take care of like you and the family. And I can't go hang out with my friend again."
That's not entirely accurate. His reaction was more
terrible.
His reaction was more along the lines of, "Yes, we had talked about having a kid, but I was looking forward to practicing having another kid with you several more times."
Yeah, I get that, but his reaction was so like flat. Keiko's like, if I was Keiko, I'd have slapped him across his face in that moment. Be like, "Be happy for us."
And I mean, I said the same thing when I watched it. I was just like, I mean, I get what you're saying, but there's nothing that says that you can't still, enjoy intimate time with your wife. I mean, she's not that far along yet that you can't.
Yeah,
I mean, you
can have some fun. Yeah, it's your wife. I'm sure she's happy to see you. Wink, wink.
Right.
I would have made a joke of like, I only needed one night. Now he's all like, I thought we would need several nights. I would have made a joke, but like, that's how potent it is for the O'Brien scene or something.
Well, again, this was the 90s, so there's only so much that they could do. And that was also one of the common tropes of the 90s is the dad who, he's just kind of like, he's committed to his wife, but it's like only so long as he can have sex with her whenever,
Yeah.
And that was also another trope that we saw early on in the episode too, where he's trying to rush back to clean the quarters, and they're all messy and terrible and whatever else. And it's like, once again, quintessential dad left alone. He can't keep his house tidy. He doesn't know how to clean up after himself, and he's got to rope in his best friend to do a mass quick cleaning before she comes home and scolds the nascent husband. Like that was another one of those early 90s tropes, which annoying me to no end, but yeah.
Well, I mean, like later on he's trying to hang out with the family, and Keiko's like, I got work to do, and Molly's like, I want to draw, and he's like, can I draw? And she's like, I'm drawing, and he just sits there like a confused puppy. I'm like,
I will also put some of that back on Keiko. She hasn't seen her husband in a year. Oh, this hear me out. I'm just saying.
Okay.
She hasn't seen her husband in a year.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. And she's now back. And I understand that she's probably got some things she needs to finish up and everything else, but y'all can't schedule some time to like just be a family together. You haven't seen him in a year. You haven't seen each other in a year.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, other than the fact the episode seems to indicate that this episode takes place over a longer period of time than like, a day or two. It actually took over several weeks, but I get your point. Has Keiko given the couple days time to O'Brien?
Right. Like it seems like it's kind of just been like she's just come back and she's immediately still working. She's just doing what she can while she's at home. And he's kind of cleared. He's got all this gaps of time available that he was normally doing things that he is now given up to be with his family, and no one in his family is paying him any attention.
Right.
So it's just like
I guess what I'm getting at is like there's the scene where O'Brien's walking past the bar and Julian grabs him and says, "Come have a beer. I heard you're gonna have another child." And O'Brien is like reluctant to come in, but like not reluctant to come in. Like he doesn't want to go home almost. What I wish what the episode had done in those moments, it had been Bashir is the one who's suddenly left by himself.
That would have been. Yeah, they should have shown that more. Like O'Brien.
Yeah, O'Brien is more excited about being with his family again, being with Molly, being with Keiko, and it's Julian Bashir who's now depressed. Before he and O'Brien were kind of at odds. They weren't.
Having a late night drink or grabbing lunch together, or someone wanted to pop by someone else's quarters just because they're bored or whatever. Now all those things he can't do anymore because O'Brien is back with his family, and it'd be inappropriate for him to drop in on O'Brien at, say, 10 o'clock at night and go to the holodeck to shoot up the English Channel or whatever it was,
Yeah, show him trying to do darts with Morn and that being nothing. Yeah. I wish it hadn't been O'Brien who was having all this weird angsty. Basically, as I was watching this episode, I was like, O'Brien, get your act together. Well, your wife's home, your kid's home, get your act together.
They could have done both, and they should have done both to a greater degree than what we saw. There was more focus on O'Brien than Bashir being, the one missing the friend. We do get that sense from Bashir that he does miss hanging out with O'Brien, but they make it seem like, he's just a regular single guy. He's got other options. Right. They may not be as good, but he still has other options. But it would have been better if they had made it a point to show that their friendship had changed so much that, yes, you have other people you could talk to and hang out with, but it's not the same as hanging out with your best friend. Everybody knows that. Right. So, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I do hope at some point we really nail down the Bashir O'Brien friendship a little bit more, like a more sweet, tender kind of moment between the two of them where they have some sort of big shootout and Bashir is hurt and O'Brien has to carry him across, some sort of ravine, some sort of like, this is how far their relationship has come. The two of them are now, thick as thieves, best buddies. I mean, we get that. We know that they're definitely there.
I understand what you're saying.
Their relationship has improved. And there's plenty of time for that to happen because we're only just now on the second half of the show. So, but I look forward to seeing some more of that. I guess I was just thinking, you've said that people are like hard on Keiko as a character as opposed to Bashir or as opposed to O'Brien. And in this episode, I felt like it was O'Brien who was dropping the ball. Like, your wife comes home and says she's pregnant, and you don't immediately, even if you're having a hard time faking it, fake the heck out of it. You fake it. You make sure your wife knows how happy you are.
Once again, this is the product of the 90s, which even though they're trying to do a futuristic show, it's that whole, everybody is still the same. We're still guided by these same kind of, very old ways of thinking here. And him being this kind of lackluster, she's pregnant. That is.
Well, I as I'm thinking about it, I'm like, what should he done? He should have been happy. He should have been going to Cisco and been like, I'm having another kid.
Right. That would have been. I think that would have been a great thing to see, especially because we know that Cisco himself was very much a family man. I think he would have loved to have heard that news.
What I'm getting though at is I think it would have been great for him to say something like, maybe she'll be a writer. Maybe like he'll say something to the effect of like, I can't wait to see what her life will be as her father, which would then put an emphasis on the whole Dejara situation. The Dejaras are strict. And here comes O'Brien being like, I can't wait for my daughter to have a full life
to do all these things. And he's like telling it, especially if he was like telling it to Cisco, who was maybe with the new emissary or with Kira or somebody. And so they're overhearing this human gush about the endless, boundless potential of the kid that's getting ready to arrive. And they can be anything they want. And I can't wait to see him grow and learn. And maybe they'll do this, maybe they'll do that. And and his excitement carrying him through this moment that he is totally unaware that he's just walked in on these people who are debating the finer points of a caste system. So that would have been a very interesting scene, and then
I also wish Jake had been brought up briefly. Like, Jake is not following in his dad's footsteps. He's going to be a writer. His dad is a military man, and his son is not at all.
Nog, who is not in the family business, and he's going to be a Starfleet officer. So
it's funny. The Ferengi have a caste system. It's one caste. It's merchant. That's basically it.
That's it.
Profit.
Money. What caste are you in? Money. Which one? Money, dollars.
Yeah.
Platinum. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. But anyway, I want to say I like this episode. Took risks, especially with the whole emissary thing. It moved the story forward in a way.
Yes.
This episode moves things forward there. I'm glad to see Keiko back. I do feel like, unfortunately, it's one of those situations where it's hard to have family members in a show like this, which the show has already addressed. It's hard having loved ones in this line of work, and therefore the show also has a hard time.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad she's back in the sense of that. I feel like O'Brien and Keiko, as a married couple, should be together as much as possible.
Yeah, and we haven't really seen Keiko. This is the return
She's been
of
gone
Keiko.
for a while. Yeah. And of course, his daughter Molly is cute as all get out. She's, I guess, 4 now, like I think I've said.
Yes.
So yeah, I just want to smack O'Brien across his head and be like, "Get your ass in gear, bro. Love your wife and like tell her how wonderful she is." And I don't know, but whatever. You're right. 90s tropes were probably winning out.
Absolutely. Well, so that's your final thought there. You like the episode? You like what you saw so far? We kind of get a catch up, basically. We're really kind of of a lot of people here. Cisco, right. The O'Briens, Bashir, everybody. We're now kind of moving into this next phase of what the show is really going to be about, and significant certain things here. So
I'm really curious now. What is it going to mean for Cisco to be the emissary? Because it's been reaffirmed that yes, you are this person.
You are the emissary, and it is very important that you understand that you are the emissary.
Right. So I assume the show is going to grab that bull by the horns and tell us some stories.
We've got seasons 5, 6, and 7.
Yeah.
To find out. So.
All right.
Well, all right. I think that's going to do it for us on this episode. We did go a little bit over, but not nearly as bad as last week. As always, just like to say, I thank you all for listening, of course. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, you can find us anywhere that we do the social medias, which is mainly Facebook right now. Don't even ask about Twitter anymore. We don't ask about Twitter. You can also leave comments on any of our videos on our YouTube channel, which is, of course, called The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast. And you can listen to us by searching for the same name anywhere you listen to podcasts. I happen to do it on Spotify. So until next week, guys, take care of yourselves.
Thanks, guys.